Welcome everyone to the Interneighborhood Cooperation Transportation Committee meeting for May 8th, 2025. We've got 4 topics tonight, starting with Denver Reserve sidewalks. The program is just getting started. Billing of residents has started this year and work has begun. We're going to hear about it from the new DOTI program director for the sidewalks enterprise, Geneva Hooten. Next, we'll have an update on the state legislative session, which ended just yesterday. Matt Fromer is back to give us an update on that. And then we'll hear from Molly Lanphier from DOTI on the East Avenue safety study regarding streets parallel to the East Colfax bus rapid transit. Finally, we'll end the night with the biking season really beginning for a lot of people. Avi Stopper will be talking to us about bike streets. Avi has been here before several years ago, and his program and map have really expanded since then. But we will start with Geneva Hooten. Geneva used to be co-chair of the INC Transportation Committee, but has always, as long as I've known her, been a transportation professional and has now been named as the program director for the Sidewalks Project, which was something that citizens put on the ballot and voted for so that Denver now is in charge of citywide sidewalks. I will stop my sharing. Geneva, you
Great.
are co-host and you can share.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see familiar faces. Hi, Michael Henry. So good to see you. And Sean and others. Yes, I co-chaired this committee for 5 years. I think we should emphasize that. It was a long time. And I stepped down just before I started grad school. I think it was 2018. Anyway, nice to see everyone. I'm going to share my screen. This can be a fairly informal presentation. I have a few slides and I'm happy to take questions as well. So let me go ahead and share. Okay. Are you all seeing just the slides? Or are you seeing my full screen?
The full screen, not the presentation mode yet.
Okay, got it. Yeah, we don't do Zoom very often, so I'm a little clunky at it. Okay, how about that?
No, it's the same.
Okay, let's see. Hmm, Let me see if I can share in a different way. Um,
I think if you stop sharing, go into presentation mode, and then start sharing, it'll let you pick which window to share.
that's what I did
Mm,
actually.
mm.
So let me try that maybe one more time and see if it'll go. I don't want that. Oh, I don't want that. Okay. Technical difficulties. Okay, well, I think you all are still seeing a goofy, you were seeing it as this. Okay, well, we're just gonna roll with it. I'm gonna go a little bit bigger and I'm gonna put this over here. Look at that. Okay, not the slickest I've ever seen, but it's gonna work.
Looks good.
Um, all right, how's that for everyone?
Very good.
Okay, cool. So, hello, and as Joel mentioned, I was recently named director of this new program. That said, I've been with the city for coming up on 6 years. I formerly led the city's bike program, and I've been in the transportation field for about 15 years. And as the sidewalk program got up and running, we did just start revenue collection, which is really exciting. That started in January. I can get more into that. And so I was hired as well in January. So I'm relatively new to the role. And if you are perhaps less aware of it, this is part of the Citizen Initiative 307, Denver Deserves Sidewalks, which was a big deal. It really shifted the responsibility for how sidewalks were repaired and reconstructed from individual property owners to the city itself. This is the only kind of program that funds and shapes it in this way in the nation. And so we are really at the vanguard of figuring this out and certainly have a lot to learn from other cities, but are also making our own way and forging our own path. And while the Ordinance 307 was passed by voters in November of 2022, There were about 2 years or a year and a half of working through significant amendments to that. Jill, who's on the call, was very, very, very involved in that and led that effort, or chaired the committee. And Jill is really the expert on how we got to the amendments as they were passed. But ultimately, what it did was refine a number of things related to how the bill and how the fee is assessed, and clarified some things related to affordability. And I'm probably missing one other thing. But anyway, those amendments passed last September. And then, as we mentioned, revenue collection started in January. And that also means that we now are running a sidewalk enterprise program. And because it's an enterprise program, it functions a bit differently than other kinds of city programs. And what the original initiative and then the amendments have asked, and the charge that we have, is to be building a complete sidewalk network with urgency. And that is a huge thing. It means that we need to build over 350 miles of brand new sidewalks, what have been up to this point usually called sidewalk gaps, bringing more than 1,200 miles of sidewalks up to standard, meaning that those are sidewalks that don't meet our existing American with Disabilities Act standards. It means that they're not wide enough and other things. And then we have an unknown number of miles of sidewalks that are in need of repair. And when you look at all those numbers and then think about what have we been able to do up to this point, so building sidewalks is hard and it's costly. And so to date, usually less than 9 miles of sidewalks have been delivered per year by the city. And in some cases, less than that. And so we are going from a certain level of work getting completed every year at a certain level of funding to now saying, hey, we have this huge amount of work to do. And in an urgency to do that within a targeted 9 years or as soon thereafter as we can. And ultimately, we know that the goal is to build sidewalks. Great. And then come a lot of very valid questions. Where are we building them? When are we building them? How are we building them? I saw a comment about green concrete. Those are the sorts of questions that will be answered through the sidewalk implementation plan. And then from a city bureaucracy and program standpoint, we have lots of questions like, how are we deciding where to build sidewalks? How do we make sure that we have programmatic ways of addressing issues that come up? How are decisions made internally? How much will this cost, and how do we manage those finances and the budget? And all of those kinds of meaty questions get answered through program management. So there are 2 big buckets that we're moving forward with concurrently. One is very much a public-facing effort, and that's the implementation plan, which we will kick off this summer. And the other is that kind of behind-the-scenes work to figure out all these other pieces so that we can move quickly and build as many sidewalks as we can, as quickly as we can. And ultimately, it's going to take those 2 pieces of program management and that sidewalk implementation plan to identify the areas that we move into design and construction, which makes sense. We need that to be a community-driven process, and we need it to be something that lots of people have bought into and agree to say, this is the way that makes sense for us to move forward, considering all these constraints that we have. And a little bit more about that implementation plan. This is going to guide how we are delivering this program for the years to come. And the engagement strategy is focused in a different way than we might do for other kinds of citywide projects. We're not saying, hey, what do you think about sidewalks? And we're not saying, hey, tell me about your ideal sidewalk, because we have standards for those. And we are kind of beyond those types of very high level questions, and instead are getting at things like, okay, we know that there will be constraints. So how do we go and have discussions about trade-offs? How do we talk about prioritization of the work across the city? We have things like Vision Zero, and we could focus on the higher injury network. We could focus in our equity areas. We could focus next to schools. There are lots of different ways to kind of slice and dice the pie and figure out where to go first. And that needs to be based on community value and community input. And the implementation plan itself is going to guide us to say, here are the pockets of the city where we can go and do that work. And that will be identifying where we have gaps or new sidewalks that need to be built, sidewalks that need to be brought up to standard, maybe where we can align our sidewalk funding with other projects that are underway. One build is what we like to call it, and identifying where we can focus our repairs. And those will be focused on years 1 through 6, 7 to 9, and then 9 years and beyond. And that 1 to 6 year time frame is strategic because first we have a lot of things in the city that are done on a 6-year time frame, like our annual capital improvement plan. And while this does not adhere to a capital improvement plan, it's still, there are a lot of ways that we do operate on a 6-year schedule. And by ordinance, this plan needs to be updated every 5 years. And we don't want to go to the end of it. We want to make sure that we have a little bit of overlap while we're getting that new plan developed. So all of that is to say that the plan is going to happen, it's kicking off this summer. We will absolutely be in touch with more information about how to get engaged, but that is coming your way. And Joel, because of my screen issues, I'm not actually able to monitor the chat. Will you let me know if there are questions that are coming through that I should answer right away?
Absolutely. Typically, we'll take questions at the end, and there are a few in the queue.
Okay, sounds good. And not to forget why we're here, and that is to build sidewalks. We have some exciting things happening in the realm of construction. And those are in a few different buckets. The first is we have a spot repair project that is underway here in 2025. I anticipate for the contractor to have notice to proceed on that literally any day. And we have $3.5 million allocated for that work. And those are spot repairs on concrete. We are not touching flagstone spot repair at this point. And so those are things that have come through 311. So if you have a sidewalk in front of your home or on your way to work that is damaged, you can submit a 311. Be sure to submit that with a photo. That comes into our queue. We have not a surveyor. We have an inspector who goes out and looks at that and says, hey, this meets these different criteria. And then as best we can, we're taking groups of work that need to be done, and we'll send our contractor out to do that work. The reason for waiting until we have several things to address, and in some cases that might mean going out and finding them ourselves, is because we pay for mobilization cost, and it doesn't make sense. As much as we can, it is better to go out and do more work at once so that we can realize those costs over a number of different spots. And then for larger sidewalk construction projects, we have our integrated construction contract, which is in active procurement and will be going to council for their review in July. High level, what an integrated construction contract will do for us is it will give us resources, and it's going to allow us to hire up to 3 different firms, and then they will, in essence, carry their own procurement for sidewalk work. So they are going to be working with a lot of smaller contractors and overseeing that work. And so ultimately, it's going to give us a lot of different options in how to distribute work and to get it done in different ways than we have previously. And it's also worth noting that the general obligation bond program, Elevate and Rise, allocated about $60 million for sidewalk projects. And many of those sidewalk projects are the first that are anticipated to go to construction through this integrated construction contract. And so right now we have 36 of those projects that are remaining to be constructed. And those are going to move into construction in 25 and 26. Okay. And then behind the scenes, as I mentioned, there are elements of the program management setup that are happening that are not necessarily things that are like flashy and exciting, but they're really important. So the first is program procurement. And so that means making sure that I am able to have resources for professional services and construction services. And for lots of good reason, procurement takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to make happen. And so that has been a huge focus of my time and some of our team's time, just so that we have resources to do this. I've also been working on enterprise fund policies. This is an enterprise fund, which means it's its own separate business within, but outside of government in some ways. It's absolutely within government, but it's a different type of thing. And so it has its own legal implications. There are a lot of intricacies and just things to consider with that. We are also working on rule and regulation updates specific to billing and clarifying some of the billing. More to come on that. We have, that's just a hint of what's on the horizon. And then we're also creating new positions and hiring key staff to help build this out and do the work. So you are probably interested in what will be happening this summer and how to get involved. And so, like I mentioned, we have the implementation-wide citywide kickoff, which will be scheduled this summer, and that will be happening. Please do submit 311s if you have a sidewalk that you know that needs some help. If you have any questions about your bill or have yet to receive your bill for the first half of the year, some of you won't receive it quite yet just because of how the sidewalk bill is tagged onto the stormwater bill. And so there's just a little bit of goofiness with that. And so if you have questions about that, this I can put into the chat, and it's a lookup tool. You put in your address and you will see how much you will be charged. If you have any questions on that, I can also put an address into the chat, and we're happy to always take a look and answer any questions. And then here, the QR code will send you to the city's website where we have an FAQ and a lot of other information. And that's it. So I'm actually going to stop sharing for now so I can see faces. And I'm happy to take questions.
Great. We've got 20 people on the line and several questions already. Let's take them in the order they were proposed. Tom, do you want to start with yours?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation so far. We're very interested to know how, in implementing the sidewalk plan, you will address Clean Colorado and the city's net zero goals as they relate to concrete's, bad global warming footprint issues.
Yes, very good question. And right now, the plan for evaluating how that could look is going to be through the program management scope that I'm working on. And so as we're working on doing lots of program setup, one of those key pieces will be evaluating what could potential different materiality look like? How could we integrate some of these other standards for different concretes? There will be cost and implementation considerations, and so it needs to be done at a programmatic level to understand if that's the way that we move forward, what are the risks and benefits of doing so? So it's a really good question, and know that it's on my mind, and it will be addressed.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's definitely one of those issues that is fluid in the industry, and lots of changes will be happening over the course of your program. But there's things that you can do now that would be great.
Great. Next, we have Matt Fromer asking a scope question. Matt, are you here? There you are.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for the great presentation. I put this in the chat, but I'm wondering whether, like, in terms of like eligible uses for the sidewalk fund, is it limited to sidewalks only, or can it be used for like intersection improvements like crosswalks or pedestrian refuge or median type projects as well?
I like where your head is at, but it is very specific to only sidewalks. Yes. So things like a median or making a bulb out, those sorts of things would not be covered within the sidewalk enterprise program. Yeah, good question.
There could be pooling of enterprise funded work and Denver funded work if it made sense to from a one build perspective. Is that right?
If I'm hearing you, you're saying, but the sidewalk program could be working on something, and then to do something else, it would require other funding source that could come to it. Potentially, yes.
Okay,
but
yeah.
most specifically, the sidewalk program will not be funding those things and cannot fund them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
David has a question about right-of-way.
Yeah, do you want me just to answer the question? I see
Sure.
it
Yeah,
in the chat.
I guess, yeah, it's sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of neighborhoods that have sidewalks that are like 2 or 3 feet wide, and neighbors may not be happy to lose their front lawn. And I'm just wondering, I know it'd be more expensive to move the curb out, but it would also accomplish Vision Zero, goals to narrow the streets. I know if that's a
Yeah.
possibility.
It's going to be, we're going to look at it for sure to figure out. So what David is talking about is in the instance of having, say, a Hollywood curb sidewalk. So it's 3 feet directly adjacent to the street. If you could potentially go into the street, and that would mean rebuilding an entire curb and gutter instead of going into, say, someone's property or going into someone's lawn, depending on where that property line lies. So we're going to be evaluating what that could look like. There are a lot of different considerations for pros and cons of that approach of going into the street. I think there can be a ton of benefits, but we need to evaluate what that could look like and in which cases could it make sense. So it's on the table for sure.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Yeah, next we have Michael Henry. Michael?
Geneva, congratulations on your new job.
Thank you, Michael.
As I already put in the chat, I'm sure you know that a number of older neighborhoods like Capitol Hill and Cheeseman Park and North Capitol Hill have some blocks that have a lot of flagstone, I should say historic flagstone sidewalks. And we're very proud of those, and we really want to preserve them. But there are a lot of different angles as to how to repair flagstones sidewalks that are in disrepair, and there are many of them that are dangerous. What are your thoughts about how to get your arms around that?
What a good question. Oh man, flagstones are so hard. What I will say is that we know that flagstones are a challenge for a lot of different issues, for ADA accessibility, for just longevity of the asset. They don't last in the same way as concrete. And we know that there are neighborhoods that have very strong historic standards and say this is something that's really important to us. And so flagstones are such a complicated issue that it's something that we're going to be focusing in on as kind of a special thing to evaluate and to look into what that can mean for repairs, for instance. So that is another thing that's on my radar in a pretty big way as something that we're going to need to work through. I don't have a great answer for you, but just to say that we're gonna focus on it.
Well, please reach out to some of the RNOs in neighborhoods that have historic flagstones.
I will.
And there are a number of folks that have studied it very carefully.
Thank you.
Yes,
We'll see if we
will
can squeeze in a couple more questions here. Bruce, you have a question about the fee?
Oh, yeah, Geneva, I'm wondering what homeowners can do if they are being charged for a sidewalk or a property side that they really aren't responsible for.
Yeah, so Bruce, if you have specific questions about a bill, I'll put it into the chat, the address to go to. But maybe what I'm hearing is you have a property and you have several frontages of that property that you are caring for and are very aware of, and there might be one that is not. Based on how the ordinance is written, the frontage, even if it's not something that is that you would consider your frontage, is what is calculated into the everything above the 230-foot base.
These are all behind city and state built fences and walls.
Okay. Yeah, Bruce, I'll put the email into the chat and send it to us and we can take a look at it, of course. Let me do that after I answer questions.
Okay. Thank you. Let me sneak in a couple more questions of my own. Now that the city has taken responsibility for the sidewalks, I'm hoping that the city sort of defends the sidewalks from damage. That is, previously, if a truck drove up onto a sidewalk and was sitting there and the sidewalk was clearly broken by the wheels, you could take photos of it and send it in to 311 all day long, and they would say, gosh, thanks for letting us know, but it's not our problem. I hope it's now the city does expect that it's their problem and would like to know if there's an identifiable party that is grossly damaged sidewalks. And along those lines, Denver Water is doing the really excellent lead program, but they're drilling these holes in the sidewalks. And then what I've seen is putting the concrete plug that was removed back in, kind of loosely fitting, that then as water drains around that plug, it sinks and becomes a trip hazard. What kind of approach can we expect Denver to take to defend its assets against people who are damaging them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have a good answer for you, but I'll add it to the ever-growing list of good things for us to work through.
Yeah, there's a lot of good photos that could be taken of these circular trip hazards Denver Water has created, and that will be getting worse. And then on a real positive sense, uh, Denver Denver was talking with Denver Streets Partnership about a sidewalk stamp. Is there any news on that?
We are doing work internally and we will be sharing more information about that this fall.
That could be really exciting and give a lot of civic pride.
Yeah, agreed.
Geneva, thank you for joining us, and you're welcome to stay and answer more questions in the chat. Stay as long as you like.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to dip, as they say, but I appreciate everyone's time, and I'll put a couple of the things that I mentioned into the chat, and I'll also put my email in case you have questions.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Next, we have Matt Fromer joining us. Matt has joined us several times over the past couple years to keep us updated on what's happening at a state level. There's been a lot of legislation, more than in the past, regarding transportation and mobility, as well as coming to join us to talk about the governor's vision for transportation for many years to come. Just yesterday, the legislative session ended at the state, and we are lucky to get Matt, probably sleep deprived, to tell us about things that happened this year and things that nearly happened this year, and maybe what they mean. Matt, I've made you co-host, so anything you care to share, you can. We're just happy to have you here.
Great, thanks, Joel. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick.
Wow, presentation. Excellent.
Yeah.
Looks perfect.
I just whipped this together in about 5 minutes. So I hope it's accurate, but I guess we'll find out together. As Joel said, my name is Matt Fromer. I'm the Transportation and Land Use Policy Manager for a nonprofit called the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. Yeah, work on transportation policy, land use, housing, and climate. And yeah, just going to give a brief recap on some of the bills we saw at the legislature this year. Some successful and some not so much. To get us started, here's one bill that did pass. This is Senate Bill 25-30. So this is Senators Winter and Heinrichsen, and then Representatives Froelich and Lindstedt. You'll see those names on many of the transportation and climate bills that go through the legislature, especially Senator Faith Winter from up in the kind of Westminster, Broomfield area. She's a huge multimodal transportation and climate champion. But the goal of this bill is to expand transportation options like transit, biking, and walking to cut emissions, save people money, improve public health, and improve transportation equity. So what does the bill do? What it does is require CDOT and our metropolitan planning organizations like DRCOG, that's like the regional council of governments, to create what we're calling transit and active transportation project inventories, and basically identify the gaps in transit bike ped infrastructure with a real focus on state and regional roads, where we're seeing like real barriers to multimodal connectivity. And the hope here is that this will inform state and regional transportation plans. And I'll touch on this later, but CDOT later this year is going to finalize its 10-year plan. They spend about $2 billion a year on transportation, and the 10-year plan kind of determines how they're going to spend that money, which projects they're going to prioritize. And traditionally, it's been the lion's share has gone to road projects, new highway lanes, intersections, that sort of thing. So there's a real effort to kind of shift that approach and fund other transportation options like transit, biking, and walking. Part of this bill is about more collaboration with local governments and having cities share their multimodal projects, including bike ped projects, with the regions and with the state, in hopes that we can connect those projects to funding at different levels, and then reporting to the legislature on those funding options. And then one other piece here that's kind of like in the policy weeds is having CDOT and the MPOs differentiate between fix-it first projects and road capacity projects. Right now, they're all bundled, and sometimes you'll get a project that's really presenting as like a safety and repair project, but also like adds a highway lane while they're at it, and it doesn't actually differentiate and quantify the spending on these different types of investments. And that's something we want them to do, because we think about climate change. Highway expansion projects are really counterproductive to our goals to reduce emissions. But we do want to improve safety on the system for all users, and we want to repair and maintain our system. And so just kind of separating those as we plan, and then in their dashboards up online. So excited about this bill. I mean, initially it was a little more expansive, I would say. But as things do with the legislature, it kind of got watered down over time to get through the two chambers. Another exciting bill, and I think this was the very last bill to pass at the legislature last night at like 6 p.m. It was a wild ride on this one, dating back to last session where it failed. But this is a Senate Bill 161. It's called Transit Reform. Senators Winter and Joda, and then Representatives Froelich and Lindstedt, the same on the House side. And this is really focused on RTD and trying to improve RTD and align the agency's goals with state and regional transportation and climate goals. You may remember reading about the predecessor to this bill was House Bill 1147 last session. It had a lot of the same elements. Last year's version of the bill, though, would have actually changed the process for determining who's on the RTD board of directors. Right now, it's 15 elected board directors, and there's an effort last year to replace a portion of those with appointed board directors. And for that reason, it kind of went down in the final days of the legislative session. This year's version does not do that. I will kind of run through it. It is kind of like a grab bag of improvements to RTD. And I should set the table a little bit by just saying, RTD is massive. I think it's like one of, if not the biggest transit agency in terms of total geographic service area. Just huge. Like most transit agencies, it struggled during the pandemic, and they cut service by, I think, like 40%. And they've been slowly bringing it back over the last 5 years, although there's still a laggard compared to other large transit agencies around the country. We still have relatively low service and low ridership compared to where we were before the pandemic. So a lot of us have been thinking about how to restore service and ridership more quickly, and then expand beyond there to build the transit system that we really need in the region. So to that end, here are a few things in this bill, 161. First, it's additional planning requirements that more align with what DRCOG and CDOT do at the regional and state level. So a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan. There's a fiscally constrained plan. So what can they do within their current budget? And then unconstrained. So thinking, if we did have more transit funding, what could we build? What sort of service could we have? And then new performance measures around ridership, service, workforce safety, and major capital projects. Right now, yeah, RTD doesn't have ridership goals, which you might expect them to, but this bill would require them to, over time, have ridership goals and then track progress toward meeting those. And then, yeah, the second thing is updating RTD's mission. Fairly outdated language in the state statute. The state legislature created RTD back, I think, in the 1969. And there was some really outdated language around like considering all surface transportation options. We really want RTD to focus on transit and growing transit. So this does that. More transparency and accountability. So public facing dashboards on performance and again, tracking the progress toward performance measures and targets. This fourth one here, I'm really excited about. This is around the fare programs and specifically RTD's EcoPass. I don't know if everyone's familiar with EcoPass, but it's essentially like an unlimited transit pass, often or typically offered through employers at a discount. There's also something called the Neighborhood EcoPass program. And that's one where an apartment building or a neighborhood can get together and apply for a bulk purchase of an EcoPass at a pretty significant discount. And just to give you a sense of the numbers there, for the Neighborhood EcoPass program right now, it's $125 per home for the year. So like a little over $10 per home. And that's for everyone who lives there. So if you have 4 people living there, everyone gets an EcoPass for $10 total, and you can ride RTD as much as you want. Pretty amazing deal. And yet only, I think, 66 apartment buildings or neighborhoods have signed up, almost all of which are in Boulder, over 50 of them in Boulder, and only 5 of those apartment buildings are in Denver. And it's not because RTD doesn't want this program to succeed. They say they do want more uptake of EcoPasses. So this bill does require more education and outreach. It also requires apartment building owners to conduct surveys of their residents. And if most people want an EcoPass, then they need to provide them. So hopefully that will lead to more uptake of the EcoPass. It has shown to significantly increase transit use in places like Boulder, where like every CU student has one. Everyone who works along Pearl Street has one through that business district. There's just been huge uptake. And I think they found that EcoPass holders are 6 times more likely to use transit. So excited about that piece and where it will lead. RTD also needs to update their Neighborhood EcoPass program pricing strategy and before, I think it's July 2026. So looking forward to that. The next one on here, partnerships and service expansion. So clarifying how and why RTD makes service changes and like how they make those decisions. So more transparency there and updating that process. And then the buy-up service process. This is one where, cities and counties, many of them are coming to RTD and asking to buy service with their own money. So Boulder County, for example, has a transportation tax. They have a climate tax as well. And they've asked RTD to increase service with their own money. RTD's turned them down, mostly because they don't have enough bus drivers, or at least that's what they've been saying over the past few years. But we need more clarity around that process. Again, the goal here is increasing service across the region. Another piece is this Regional Transportation Authority, or RTA study from CDOT. RTAs have been set up around the state. There's a recent one in Eagle County. They have taxing authority to raise money for transportation. And we should be looking at ways to increase the number of transit providers in the region. Maybe it doesn't have to all be on RTD, from paratransit all the way up to passenger rail. So studying that. And then the final piece, this is probably the most controversial, is the governance. So First, clarifying the board responsibilities. I think that's really important. And then it does create this new accountability committee to study the board structure and whether like a 15-member elected structure makes sense, or perhaps some of those should be appointed with specific expertise or background in certain areas like finance or urban planning or transportation planning. So there's a lot of energy put into that accountability committee. I think it's 13 members is what we landed on, like how they're appointed, what sorts of expertise they need to have. And I think the recommendations need to be submitted at the end of the year, I think. I'd have to double check that date. But yeah, that's the basic gist of this bill. Again, it's kind of a grab bag of different transit ideas to try to improve RTD and the partnerships with RTD. Okay, that was the good news. This one was a major bummer. This is House Bill 25-1303, which kind of fell apart a couple weeks ago. Some of you may have read about this one too, but this was a multi-year effort, previously known as the Vulnerable Road User Bill from last year. But it came back this year. There was a lot of negotiation around it. The basic goal is to reduce traffic fatalities and injuries for bicyclists and pedestrians. So vision zero, basically. And what this bill would have done is create a new crash prevention enterprise at CDOT to fund bike ped safety projects. And I thought this was a really clever policy. So the funding for the program would have come from a $3 annual fee on car insurance policies. So per vehicle, $3 a year, about a quarter a month to fund the program. 70% of the revenue is for bike ped safety. And then the 30% is for wildlife crossings. There are a lot of crashes, especially on the western slope, with deer and elk, and a lot of fatalities because of that. So these wildlife crossings have proven to save lives. So 30% for that, which again is like really smart politically to bring in legislators from the western slope. And yeah, as far as the fee nexus, I think one important thing here is that this program could very well pay for itself by reducing traffic fatalities and injuries, which are incredibly costly to us all because they raise the costs of insurance. The US DOT values a life at something like $13 million. And this program, the $3 a year fee, would have amounted to, I think, $12 million for the bike ped safety program. So even if you just saved one life, it would have paid for itself. However, it did not make it across the finish line. It died, I think, in the Senate Finance Committee. Couldn't get enough votes. And what we heard from senators was that, cost of living in Colorado is really high, and we can't possibly increase that further. And so there just wasn't the appetite for this one, unfortunately. Okay. I wanted to just touch on a couple other things outside the legislature. One is a bit of a call to action. So I mentioned earlier that CDOT is updating their 10-year plan this year that will determine how they're going to spend tens of billions of dollars in the coming decade. They have some really good goals that we've worked on with them that are probably the best in the country for a state DOT, at least in my opinion. And but right now they're just goals, right? They're not like the true test is in the budget, right? So some of those goals are reducing fatalities, including for vulnerable road users like cyclists and pedestrians, cutting greenhouse gas emissions, expanding transit, prioritizing fix-it-first projects over road expansion, and then the specific goal in the Colorado Transportation Vision 2035 to double the share of trips from transit, biking, and walking over the next decade. So I just want to encourage people to participate in this. There's a telephone town hall on June 12th for Region 1, which is Denver, Arapahoe, and Douglas counties. If you don't want to, or you can't attend the telephone town hall, there's also this online survey, which I can put in the chat. It takes 5 or 10 minutes. So please fill that out because the transportation commissioners at CDOT are excited to hear from the public about what people want in Colorado from their transportation system. And then just a few other updates to leave you with from the legislature. Part of the struggle this year was that we had a $1.2 billion budget shortfall, which is about a 7% decrease in the overall state budget. And transportation really had a target on its back, partially because like the numbers are just so big. And in terms of like the individual transfers, including this planned ongoing general fund transfer to CDOT. There's a bill we passed a few years ago, $100 million a year to CDOT. So they cut that down to $36 million a year, which is less spending on all sorts of transportation projects. The like highway lobby is not happy about this either, but it also included a $70 million reduction in the multimodal options fund. And that was the fund that we were really relying on to fund transit, biking, and walking projects at the state level. So a big hit there. They're still getting like a $15 or $17 million general fund transfer per year, but that was a big hit. In better news, the CDOT Bustang funding was retained, and Bustang's been a huge success story in the state. There was a bill, I think, 3 years ago to fund like a 3-year Bustang pilot to add all these routes around the state. And now I think a bus leaves along the I-70 West and I-25 corridors from Union Station, I think every 45 minutes or an hour. I don't know if people know how often the Bustang runs, but it's pretty great service now. And that funding has been retained. We need to come up with a new funding source for that in the next couple of years, but it's been a huge win. And then one other like just interesting transportation bill that I was tracking, I didn't really have a strong opinion on, but House Bill 1122, and this one is really looking ahead to autonomous vehicles. This bill requires a human operator to be behind the wheel of an autonomous vehicle if it's a medium or heavy duty vehicle. So really focused on like trucking, I guess transit as well. And I think this was brought by the Teamsters, a big priority for labor. But kind of interesting as we're looking at, robo-taxis from Tesla and from Google's Waymo picking up in places like Phoenix and Vegas, and what sort of impact that'll have on the transportation system in the future. And then just thinking, I know it's only been one day, but looking towards next year's legislative session, what we're going to prioritize, definitely want to come back and try again for the bicycle and pedestrian safety funding after House Bill 1303 failed this year. Looking for more funding for transit and that Bustang pilot I mentioned that's expiring. And then lastly, there was a big transportation funding bill we passed in 2021 that created new enterprises to fund electric vehicles, electric transit buses and school buses and more charging stations, as well as multimodal transportation projects. And there was a cap on those fees from ballot measure Proposition 117, but only for the first 5 years. So each enterprise could collect up to $100 million in the first 5 years. Next year, or the year after, really, they will be out from under that cap. So there could be an opportunity to increase some of those fees. And just to give you a flavor, those fees include things like retail delivery fees on like Amazon Prime deliveries, on Uber and Lyft. And then there is like a gas fee that functions kind of like a gas tax. It's only 2 cents, but that was created a few years back. And again, we could increase that if we want to fund some of these transportation projects we want to build. All right, that's all I have. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. I'll call on folks who proposed questions in the chat. Please feel free to propose more. Start with Michael Henry on the RTD Accountability Committee.
Matt, thanks very much for all your very, very good information. Many years ago, I was involved in the citizen initiative to require that the RTD board be elected. And I'm wondering if the statute regarding the so-called accountability committee designates what type of folks need to be on that accountability committee, whether any of them are required to be bus riders or train riders, and that they not all be from business groups as opposed to citizen groups. And if you wouldn't mind, I may have missed it, but could you describe a little bit more about your organization, the SWEEP group, and who funds it and how to learn more about it?
Yeah, sure. I so to your first question about who's on the accountability committee, I might just type it into the chat. It's not just the business community, but there's like experts in workforce development, transportation equity, one who represents transit riders with disabilities, one who represents a labor organization. Yeah, there's a lot of language in here. So I probably best if I just type that into the chat. As far as SWEEP, I can also put our website in the chat, but yeah, we're a nonprofit. We've been working on energy efficiency, electrification, like transit and smart land use across the Southwest. So it's Colorado and then 4 other states here. And doing a lot of work at the state legislature, but then also working with cities as well and transit agencies like RTD. And primarily funded by like the big climate funders like Energy Foundation. We did have some like Department of Energy grants that are yeah, being tested right now. So that's been a struggle for us recently, but yeah.
And SWEEP stands for?
The Southwest Energy Efficiency Project.
Thank you. Next question is from Bruce Besquet about EVs and hybrids.
Yeah, Matt, I'm just wondering where Colorado has ended up in 2025 with regard to drivers of EVs and hybrids paying their fair share for money to get into road construction and repair projects.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, we do have an electric vehicle registration fee that's designed to basically compensate for lost gas tax revenue. And it's set to basically like equate to what the most fuel efficient vehicles would pay. Senate Bill 260 from 2021 set those fees and they increase over time to again, like kind of compensate or offset some of the lost gas tax revenue.
Okay, and then finally, David Mincer about transit funding.
I think my question, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just wondering if our transit funding proportion has gone up compared to other states with the recent legislative wins, because it was pretty abysmal a few years ago, from what I remember.
Yes, you're right about that. I think we were ranked 44th in the country in the state's contribution to local and regional transit, so like RTD. So we were ranked 44th, and then we passed the bill last year, Senate Bill 230, that created an oil and gas production fee to fund transit and public lands. That money is going to start to flow next year. And there's a clean transit enterprise at CDOT that's figuring out what the formula should look like for that. But I think that'll bring us to like 22nd in the country. So more like the middle of the pack, but yeah, not that impressive in my opinion. We can do better.
Thank you. I've got a question. You mentioned neighborhood eco passes, which have really only ever been pursued in Boulder. And I think part of that is not only Boulder's real dedication to transit, but also Boulder's subsidy of their eco passes. So that $125 a year per household, is that an example from Boulder after the efficiency of the eco pass program and after Boulder's own subsidy?
Yeah, great point. No, the $125 per year is before the Boulder subsidy.
Wow.
And then theirs is, I think, like a 40% subsidy below that.
Hmm.
So again, like just a screaming deal on transit. So yeah, we have been talking and like brainstorming a bit on like how you might replicate Boulder's success in Denver. One idea would be to like look at maybe some of the CASR money and use that to subsidize eco passes. I don't know quite how far we could get with that, but again, they're already pretty affordable. So even a 40% discount may not add up to too much and could like very quickly deliver climate wins. Again, I mentioned like people who have an eco pass are much more likely to use RTD. It's essentially free. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if it's just for some of your trips, I think people think too much about transit as all or nothing. Can I use it for every single trip of my life? Well, if you use it for some trips, some trips that are more efficient and you weren't burning gasoline or choosing to walk or bike, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. When I served on the past program working group years ago for RTD, revamping its past programs, and this is not this last time, but a previous time, it seemed like one of the big burdens to Neighborhood EcoPass was who has the responsibility of keeping track of all the comings and goings of people in a neighborhood and getting passes to folks, collecting money from them, revoking the passes for people who move away, etc. So it seems like that might be a very practical place for local government to supplement. Uh, it, what is the mechanism? How is that done? And of course, one can
Yeah.
imagine it's easier in a multi-tenant building than in a traditional neighborhood to track comings and goings.
Yeah. I think it is a big opportunity for community groups and advocates to, really be like transit ambassadors in their communities and yeah, see if they can get their neighbors to support the EcoPass for the whole building. See how far you can get. Just one other like thing I learned through this process was that one might think RTD is sort of losing money on the eco passes because they're so cheap. But in Boulder, what they found is they it's only like a 5 or 10% um, um, loss if you compare the cost of providing the service versus the cost of the eco pass. Partially because it's like almost like a gym membership. A lot of people pay in and may never use it, but they're still paying into the system. So it's not really at a huge loss to RTD. And again, if they're trying to increase ridership to the benefit of the region, they should want to get more eco passes out there. So yeah.
No, congratulations on being a part of the advocacy community that pushed for a lot of these things, especially officially setting goals for RTD that are, orient them more towards ridership. They've always had many goals, but being clear that ridership is a goal to optimize for is something that's going to play out very well over the years. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you're able to get some sleep after long days at the end of the session.
Yeah. Thanks.
We'll turn to our third topic now. Molly Lanphier, and I may be mispronouncing your name. I don't think we've met. Lanphier is here from the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to talk about uh, the East Avenue Safety Study. And the reason why I invited Molly to come here, even though this is a citywide group and this topic is narrow in the scope of the city, is I think it shows something about DOTI listening to the concerns of the community parallel to the transformative East Colfax bus rapid transit. So, what will happen from a safety lens to traffic that's diverted and behavior of drivers parallel to East Colfax? So, I think we can all look at this, understanding what's been done for East Colfax, but also thinking about it from a citywide perspective as we do big projects in more places, BRT and otherwise. So I'll turn it over to Molly. You are promoted to share your screen.
Oh, great. Let's share my screen and I have a presentation for you all. And then Hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions. Hold on just a second. Share. All right. Now let me, hold on. My bar is in the way. Hold on just a second. Sorry. Let's just, why is this in the way? There we go.
So
Okay.
we aren't seeing the presentation mode. We're seeing the pre-presentation mode.
Yes, hold on just a second.
All right.
Let me get that up from beginning. There we go. Now can you see it?
It's perfect.
Okay, good. Sorry, took me a minute. So as Joel, thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me this evening. As Joel mentioned, we did the East Avenue Safety Study, and it used to actually be called the Parallel Street Study. And that was because this really did come out of Parallel Street to what? To Colfax. So we were originally looking at how Colfax BRT impacted these streets, but we quickly wanted this study to be standalone, to really look at the streets that I'll explain the scope and go into that, but to really look at it separately and have standalone recommendations and therefore standalone funding, because our Colfax team kept getting all the questions, and it is kind of a separate process, but very much was motivated and tied to what's going on with Colfax BRT. So as I mentioned, I wanted to just talk about the scope of this study. It is on the east side of town, although it covers a pretty big mileage here. So we looked at 13th and 14th from Broadway to Yosemite. And then 16th and 17th, we did look at, I didn't include all the data for 16th because we actually just saw very low crash rates and speed there compared to the others, but we did focus on it, or at least did our traffic counts and that sort of thing, and there's recommendations in the study. And then 17th was also focused on from Colorado to Yosemite, and then 18th Ave was originally part of the scope, but we had simultaneously a transit speed and reliability study through our transit department who looked at 18th and did many of the recommendations they put forth would have been recommendations we would have put forth. So 18th kind of lies with that study, which is being implemented currently or going to be implemented in the summer. Okay, so the crash history. Here we looked at the crash history spanning 2018 to 2022, which is pretty typical. We go back in time. And you can see 13th, 14th, 17th. I just included these again because they were the top three. And this crash picture on all three of these streets, especially 13th and 14th, is high. It's higher than we would like to see. The fatalities, of course, we want to see Vision Zero, no fatalities on our streets. But especially the combination of the bodily injuries and then the property crashes are specifically troublesome. And I'll go on because I just want to give a bigger picture of this, because what is really concerning along all these corridors is just the speeding. And so our crash picture, we know that speeding exacerbates all of the crashes, the bodily injuries that we're seeing, safety for pedestrians and cyclists. You know, everyone's being impacted negatively by the excessive speeds here. So you can see 13th, 14th, 17th. The blue is what percent is over the speed limit. So that's like going, the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. So that's going 40 or below. And then the orange is how many are going 40 and above. And again, this is a very troublesome picture, especially when you consider that the vast majority are speeding, going over that 30 miles an hour. So along with the study, we did do a lot of outreach to RNOs. Hopefully you all who are in the area had heard about it or been reached out to about it in some sort of engagement. But we did a web survey and then did in-person meetings and had a pretty good response. And again, the overall theme here is speeding, which does support the data. But you can see, I'm not going to go through each one. Of course, there's other things along the corridor that are issue areas, which I think I'll go into kind of what the study had recommended, the recommendations, and I think the recommendations do get at all of these things as well. So speeding proposed solutions. All the proposed solutions I'm going to talk about, of course, impact speeding, but these ones are really targeted at that, as slowing people down. So there's a lot of signals throughout the corridor. It would be signal coordination, which, you know, would make it so that you hit reds to really slow vehicles down. Chicanes, which I included a picture of on the, if you're facing the screen, on the far left of the screen, you'll see what chicanes are. And those are just narrowing of the roadway. And really we found that hot off the presses for DOTI is chicanes really need to be like this with flex posts in order to work. They can't just be paint. So on some of our streets, we've used paint before, but we find that that is not as effective, obviously, as flex posts. And we actually will probably not do chicanes without flex posts because we found they're pretty ineffective at this point. Bulb outs are kind of the same thing. That's the middle picture you're seeing, and that's just the curb extensions to make it safer. Again, narrowing of street, but I'll talk about it. It comes up again in pedestrian safety because it makes it safer for pedestrians as well. And then speed cushions. And I don't know if you all have heard a lot about speed cushions, but it was not a tool in our toolbox for a long time. And then we had some pilots on the west side of town and decided, yep, this makes sense on some corridors. DOTI is very much figuring out where this makes sense. So while we did include it in this study, this would be definitely a long-term solution. And we are still figuring out our policies around speed cushions. So I don't think it would be appropriate for the whole corridor by any means, but in some parts it would definitely it would make sense to have speed cushions. So some additional solutions that were proposed here, again, with the idea, all of these three things are narrowing roadways, hopefully slowing people down, are protected bike lanes. Again, probably not likely throughout the entire corridor, but definitely some. Lane reduction, or you may have heard about that, lane dieting. The middle picture shows what that is. And then a two-way conversion, which we have done, DOTI has done with success on other streets in the city. And that while it would cause some short-term confusion for sure, in the long run, it does slow traffic down. There's not that sense of that people just have a straightaway and can just go. All right, so then I'm looking at like the types of crashes that happen in the area and what we can do. And I'm going to speed up because I do want plenty of time for discussion and questions. To kind of target that broadside crashes at unsignalized intersections, we would do daylighting, which is increasing sight distance. So we would eliminate probably some parking spots, but all for to make visibility better along the corridor. And an example of daylighting is illustrated here. I'm happy to also share this presentation so you all can dive deeper. And so just to talk about what this means, you know, there is a lot. The study is pretty dense with recommendations, and it also splits it out by intersections and where DOTI should prioritize which intersection and all those things. And I have to say, I would love, now being the implementer of this study, to implement all the great recommendations. Unfortunately, the common theme here is that we're strained for funding. The study is definitely a good first step in setting the stage for us to implement some of these necessary things. So we are doing bulb outs along 13th and 14th on these streets, which those were kind of already approved by the neighborhood. We had been in talks with them. So it was, I don't want to say low hanging fruit because at this point nothing is low hanging fruit, but we already knew we had kind of ownership and could implement it quickly on our end internally. So that's all going to be internal. And then this summer, we're actually going to test out that two-way conversion on the east side. So on 13th and 14th from Quebec to Yosemite, and really see how that works and see if it does the intended benefit and if it's something we could do further along the corridor. Now I know, I think, so for next steps, a lot of the solutions that were highlighted in this study are bigger, like the speed cushions, for instance, are things we need money for. And so we want to see, before investing too much money, not that we had, I mean, it would be great if we had $1 million, millions of dollars and endless pockets, I'm sure we would, but we want to see how the BRT construction shakes out. And we really don't want to put a ton of permanent solutions here until we can do some more feasibility studies post BRT construction. That's just smart planning for us, because we are going to see kind of a weird traffic pattern along 13th, 14th, 17th with BRT construction. And then, of course, we're always looking for additional funding, especially with the financial uphill battle that we're facing right now. And then in the meantime, if you all live in the area, which I'm sure some of you do or nearby, it's not that we're not continuing to do things along these streets where we can. So we are very much still collecting data, and we do that via 311. We're still working with our colleagues at the police department to continue to identify where there's high crashes, near misses, high speeds, and where we really do need to prioritize some of this sooner than later in-house. So with that, I am working on actually this week to try and get out a long overdue FAQ. We had a public meeting about a month ago, and we're asked very good questions. So I had a lot of homework to do, and I've done it, and I just need to get a final stamp of approval, and we'll get that on our website, which is listed here. And then there's a team of us working on this. It's never just one person. So you can always email eastabsafety@denvergov.org for more information. And with that, I don't know, I can't really see, so I don't know how much time we have or any of that, but I'm happy to take questions while I have the time.
Certainly. Let's start with David Mincer. He has questions about speed tables.
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, hold on. I'm here. I don't know if this is much of a question, but I'm gonna just indulge me to get on my soapbox for a minute.
Go ahead.
The study said that for $800,000 we could install speed bumps every 4 blocks and save 2.5 lives and 120 injuries every 5 years. And now we're told, well, that's a long-term intervention. We have to study it more. And it really brings into question DOTI's commitment to Vision Zero when we just did a study, we have these recommendations, and now we're told we need to study it, do another study. I mean, over the next 5 years, 2 or 3 people will die. So yeah. People in our neighborhood are sick of speeding on 13th and 14th. I live a block away from 13th Avenue. Please just install those speed tables and study it, see how it works, but don't spend another 5 years and another 3 deaths putting those in.
Yes. And David, I hear you. It's a serious concern, and I'm sorry, my semantics are probably wrong here. I don't mean that we're going to do a whole other study on speed cushions. It's just the speed cushions that we have been put in do have some issues. I am sure you all are aware of the speed cushions we put in on 29th. It's been a very big headache. There have been a lot of lessons learned there. And I think we are really taking those to heart to be sure that we have best practices.
So the headache was not the speed bumps, it was removing parking for the bike lane. That was my
no, the speed cushions are still, there is a different, they were installed too high. Our snow plows were actually getting broken going down 29th because they weren't installed the correct way. So there was a whole other saga with how we installed them that we learned from.
If you could just pass on to folks that if this is slow walked, like it's going to be hard to ask us to support more money in the bond if they're not willing to take these steps like next year, because people are dying.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Very timely to mention the bond. Given that these projects have been identified and scoped, are they proposed as packages for the bond?
So I don't know the final list yet for the bond. I do know that 13th and 14th specifically is looking at a bond. I just don't know about 17th. I'm not in those conversations. So some of it trickles down to me and some of it doesn't. But I know 13th and 14th has made it to a certain round,
Okay. Yeah, and none of us know which projects will be selected and proposed to the voters yet, but they're in the mix to pick from.
Certainly. And so I think should 17th be, but I haven't heard yay or nay on that.
Okay. Next, Bruce, a question about signal timing. Bruce?
I don't think that was my question.
Okay, go ahead.
Everything I was commenting on is already in the chat, so I don't really have another question.
Okay, we'll move on to Thomas. Thomas is asking about the mid-block signals. Thomas?
Yeah, I'm very curious about the genesis of the alley located signals and what those were originally for, what purpose they were serving, since they're not, for the most part, they don't have crosswalks or any pedestrian or bicycle purpose. And what is the study suggesting to do with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think originally they were, believe it or not, intended for pedestrian crossing. But at the time that they were put in, we didn't have the ADA standards that we have today, which I am very thankful that we have those standards now. But it leaves us with infrastructure that, like those mid-block signals, that are not up to par. And we know that there is an issue with compliance as well there, that, cars often don't, the study saw cars go through them. They're not always heated. So the conversation, and this is outside of the study, we do try and work with DPD on enforcement. As we pave those streets, we will try and look for opportunities, again, as budget allows, to add crosswalks, to make them ADA compliant, to add signs ahead of them being, saying there's crosswalks ahead and that sort of thing. The study does say several things about them. It does recommend like red light cameras at some places. And so we are also I know, David, we're also doing a study on that in another part of town along Federal, because that is a whole program, the red light cameras, that we haven't had. So it would be a program that the city really needs to set up and figure out like a whole structure too. But that could be an option. Yeah.
So it
I
sounds
answered your
like
questions.
the signals are an appropriate and important part of keeping the area safe, and we need to upgrade their usefulness. Is that
Yes, that would be, yes, thank you.
Okay, Joe Meyer has a question about vertical elements. Joe?
Thank you. I'm curious why for the chicanes specifically, but then also more broadly for things like curb bump outs, why the flex posts are the default design solution there, as opposed to something that could do a better job actually protecting vulnerable road users from cars.
Absolutely. You ask a question that we are literally having a conversation about almost every day these days. We know flex posts are, first of all, not the best safety wise to prevent things. We also, you know, aesthetically, they're ugly, to put it bluntly. And the answer there is that it's been they're cheap. It's been an economic reason. We would love to go in with something like concrete or the Ziklas or things like that, which are the rubber curbs that hold up a little better, but it's also more expensive. So it's definitely a conversation we're having. I think the idea is to put in flex posts at these high priority, which would be like where we see high crashes, where we really see user conflicts, that we would put up flex posts, and then eventually the hope would be to do something more permanent there. Flex posts are not supposed to be a permanent solution. We are supposed to come in with something more permanent that does a better job eventually, but it's funding.
Can I ask one follow-up related to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When the flex posts are installed, does that trigger a default timeline for a review for a more permanent solution X amount of days or years in the future?
I wish it did. Unfortunately, it doesn't at this time, just because of that constraint of funding. I think we do evaluate certain projects after a year. But no, we don't have that system, unfortunately, right now. Hopefully we will.
Great. And I'm looking, there's some chat in the chat, but I'm looking for additional questions. Huang wants to go a little deeper on what we've learned about speed cushions and
Sure.
speed tables. Huang?
Yeah, Molly, nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah. I know that since I live in the area in Northwest Denver, there's been a lot of chatter actually about the speed cushions that were installed on West 29th Ave. People are upset about them, and not me personally, they're great. However,
Yes.
there has been a precedent set where the DOTI executive director will just go with whatever the rich residents on that street want. And from what I understand, they want the speed cushions to be removed, even though studies and your research and a million studies have shown that they do in fact slow traffic down. I wonder, what is the likelihood that we'll remove the speed cushions on West 29th Ave and then remove it altogether from our toolbox because residents don't like them?
So you would have to ask my executive director that question, but I have heard no chatter about removing speed cushions anywhere. In fact, like I said here, we are only talking about where we can put them. Everyone wants them now on their streets if there's a speed issue. So for us, it's a matter, we are actively figuring out prioritization of them. And again, our policies around them for where it makes the most sense, and learning best practices from places like 29th, where, as I said, we've hit some issues, but they aren't issues enough to get rid of speed cushions in our toolbox. So that is not on the table right now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I'll just end with, can you tell us about speed cushions versus speed tables? My familiarity with speed tables as an idea is kind of a raised intersection or a raised crosswalk.
That's exactly.
And or something that is like a mesa where it goes up and then it has a long flat section and then comes down rather than a short hump. Is that in the toolbox? Have we done that anywhere?
Nope, we're only doing speed cushions, and I apologize. I am not an engineer. I don't pretend to be one. I'm communications and government relations. So I don't know the rationale behind why we don't do the speed tables. I just know that we don't, and we are only doing the speed cushions. There are a few places in the city that you will also see dips, but we no longer do that either. I have a feeling it's actually because of the fire and police departments. They've been very strict on what we can and can't do. And you'll see in our speed cushions that they normally have a spot in the middle where there's not the cushion. And that is so that our emergency vehicles can get through. So I believe, but I could be wrong about that. I believe that's why speed tables are not on the table.
Okay. Yeah, David is pointing out in the chat that the study itself had recommendations for speed tables. So they're
and that's not, we just don't do those yet. I think it was put in the study, and we did, DOTI, the study was done independently of DOTI, and we do sign off on it and approve the recommendations. But right now we don't have speed tables. So those would be speed cushions where it's recommended.
okay. Well, thank you very much. I think this this group has heard for many years the through the BRT effort, the side conversations and concerns about speeding and traffic and safety on the parallel streets. So hopefully it's been inspirational to folks to hear about this study and plan changes, especially as they think about other corridors around and neighborhoods near major corridors, that DOTI does study these things, and they don't do it from a traffic lens, they do it from a safety lens, which is very much in keeping with the Vision Zero big picture. So thank you very much for joining us, Molly.
Thank you guys for having me. I will come back anytime. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll end our evening hearing from Avi Stopper. Avi is the founder of Bike Streets. And boy, it must have been pre-pandemic when Avi last joined the INC Transportation Committee, doing some work to take the crowdsourced map that his group had put together and get funding for paper versions of it, etc. And how things have changed and evolved. And so it's pretty exciting to have Avi back right as a lot of us are getting our bikes out of the garages and starting to use it. So Avi, take it away.
Thank you, Joel. Can everyone see my screen and hear me?
Looks good, sounds good.
All right, ready to rock. Great. I'm going to give you a Bike Streets project update, which will be a little bit of history, what we're up to currently, and our vision headed forward. So starting with the past, just a little bit of context. So the Bike Streets project started in 2018, and it originated to a degree with my own bike commute, starting in West Wash Park on the west side of the park and headed to the Santa Fe Arts District. And this is the prescribed route on the Emerson bike lane. And I've been riding in cities for decades, and at a certain point, I just kind of had enough of this type of experience. So one day, apropos of nothing, I decided to ride one street over on Ogden And I just enjoyed a totally qualitatively better experience. And so bit by bit, as I needed to get around town on my bike, I would look for routes that had similar characteristics to the one that I had discovered on Ogden. And this is just one such example. This is 22nd in Park Hill. I love that there's a kid on a 12-inch bike in the bottom right-hand corner wearing an R2-D2 helmet. And I found, much to my delight, that there were people all over town who were cobbling together their own routes. I remember having a conversation with a grizzled mechanic who'd been at Turin Bikes, who had been riding in town forever, and he described to me his route from Central Park to get to work. And it was very much in this same sort of spirit. Thus was born the Bike Streets Project, with this very simple and straightforward idea, which is that anyone should be able to ride a bike to any destination in Denver today. And so from that, through a long process, working with lots of folks, trying to get a read on the types of routes that people ride all over town, we put together what we call the low stress Denver bike map. And that's 500 miles. Those are 2-directional miles of trails, protected bike lanes, neighborhood bikeways, and we fill the interstitial spaces like I did on that original ride with quiet neighborhood streets like Ogden and 22nd. And I think it conforms pretty closely with this idea of comfort that DOTI has. And basically they describe, this is from their website, you might have seen this graphic before, but basically what they say is that for all ages, for riders of all ages and abilities, the types of environments that are most conducive to those folks are trails, neighborhood bikeways, and protected bike lanes. And significantly, they do not include buffered bike lanes on larger streets and bike lanes, kind of conventional painted door zone bike lanes. And so I think it's just sort of important to have that context in mind, because that's very much in the spirit of how we have designed the low stress Denver bike map, looking for trails, looking for neighborhood bikeways, protected bike lanes, and trying to fill in the spaces in between with quiet residential streets. And so very much the output of our work is an attempt to create what we think of as a map that can be used by people of all ages and abilities. And the theory of change, if you want to call it that, is that if we can get a lot of people to ride their bikes on the same streets, we create this citywide critical mass. I was very influenced by riding in critical mass rides in Chicago in the early 2000s. And it was amazing to me how downtown Chicago, which is normally just chaotic, could be so dramatically transformed. And so the idea of Bike Streets is really to try to organize the community at large to create an ongoing critical mass on a subset of streets across the entire city. And the theory is that through that sort of strength in numbers, and I'd imagine that many of you have, like me, ridden in group bike rides, whether they're large critical mass rides or smaller rides of 10 to 20 folks, is that it really transforms the environment, and the strength in numbers vibe that you get can make even more people feel comfortable, because not only do they see that it's a totally normal thing to do, but they just feel more comfortable when they're out there. Hence the idea of a virtuous circle. And long-term, our big audacious goal is to have 100,000 people every day in Denver riding bikes. We got a ways to go, but why not set a very high bar for ourselves? So since 2018, we have led about 100 group bike rides with people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds to basically every corner that you could possibly imagine in Denver. This is a group ride with a group of students from Westwood Unidos, where we rode down to Bear Creek Park in Southwest Denver. And in 2020, just to fast forward a little bit, we fell in love with the Shared Streets program. This was such a dramatic and interesting change to a lot of the very streets that we had that we had added onto the low stress Denver bike map. This was just an incredible experience for so many of us. With very minimal interventions, the city really transformed streets into places that were conducive to walking, to pushing strollers, to riding bikes. And what is so significant about it is the alignment, not only between the people who want to be out doing that stuff and residents who still want to be able to get to their houses with their cars. And what's incredible is that by creating that alignment, the city was able to move at a clip that we have never really seen as being possible before. And this program was so popular that studies afterwards suggested that 90+% of neighbors wanted these things to be permanent and they wanted them on their streets. So in the 2023 election cycle, we created a thing called Vamos, and Vamos was basically a policy platform that we developed during the campaign cycle leading up to the 2023 mayoral and council election. And the basic gist behind Vamos is a citywide connected network of shared streets. DOTI has the shared streets tool in its toolkit. Can we create a complete high comfort network that connects the entire city? That was the question that Vamos contemplated. And we put together a really comprehensive proposal, a series of phased steps that would culminate in a complete high comfort network of shared streets crisscrossing the entire city, a very detailed budget. We did a bunch of engineering drawings as well. And we did some demonstration projects. Funny enough, we did these in Lakewood and Sheridan because DOTI wouldn't let us do them in Denver. But I think that this is very applicable learning to what we propose in Denver, and indeed very similar to what shared streets were in their first form. We got a ton of support, and I'm really proud of the fact that we got a ton of support across the local political spectrum. We had city council candidates, now city councilors, from Sarah Parody to Kevin Flynn, who made Vamos part of their campaign platforms, as did the mayor himself. Alas, as these things go, it was very difficult for us to get any traction on the actual implementation of this campaign promise after the election. And so that really led us to a fork in the road. And the options were basically continue bashing our heads against the door, or we could work on something where we thought we could make real progress. And as Yogi Berra once said, when you reach a fork in the road, take it. Now, I think that technology platforms, if you think about Google for driving, that technology platforms like Google Maps are really part of the infrastructure tableau at this point. And so we started to think about the infrastructure, the technological infrastructure that undergirds active transportation. And I think that most folks who have tried to get a route from Google Maps have probably encountered something like this at some point, which is basically, this is a route from Wash Park, a bike route on Google Maps from Wash Park to City Park, and it includes this long alley section adjacent to York. It includes a block and a half of delightful riding on Colfax, a block on Josephine before you get to the protected bike lane on 16th. And so what comes across and becomes evident is that the technological infrastructure that has become very intertwined with how people drive is just not at par with the bike infrastructure, the biking technological infrastructure, excuse me, is not at par with where people are in terms of their expectations and how they experience routing when they're driving their cars. And so we started this little science project, and the project was, could we create a routing algorithm that would outperform Google? A bike routing algorithm, that is. And there are a number of really heady technical challenges to this. I would say that the first one is one that has bedeviled planners for a long time, which is, do the routes actually stick to the preferred network? Meaning, do they choose the routes that have been designated? And I think that if you talk to a lot of planners, you'll find that they're very frustrated that Google Maps' routes don't actually adhere to the lines on the map, the infrastructure indeed that planners have created. So technical challenge number one was, could we get this routing algorithm to stick to the preferred network? Technical challenge number two is that if you're going to have a high comfort network and give people high comfort bike routes, you have to also give them high comfort first and last mile connections to and from the network. That's really important. You can't send someone down Colfax to get to your high comfort bike network. You have to give them a comfortable first and last mile connection. And then last but not least, and this is a really interesting and tricky one, is that routing for bicycling is actually very different technically from routing for driving a car. And that is because there are all of these complex terrain transitions happening all the time when you're riding a bike. You might be on a street for a little while, then in a protected bike lane, then on a trail, then in a park, then on a sidewalk. And so Google, which tries to apply this global algorithm to every city and every town across the country and world, for them, it's very difficult to have the nuance that includes details like you actually need to route up this particular curb cut to get into the park here, and then you got to make this quick right and then this quick left. This is a really tricky thing. So we did the science project. We worked on this routing algorithm, and lo and behold, we were riding around town and we felt like it was really working, that consistently we were producing routes that were better than what we could get on Google. And about that time, we felt like, okay, if we're going to actually bring this to people, we can't just be moonlighting on this. We have to really invest in this because these are really significant technical challenges, and creating the technology to actually deliver these types of routes is really quite challenging. So a few of us decided that we were going to go full-time on this, invest our time and our resources heavily into it, and do the best that we possibly could do. So that brings us to the present. And in June of last year, we launched for iPhone the Bike Streets app, and it really emphasized two kind of key components, the first being routing and the second being what I call the community voice. I'll get to that in just a moment. Routing is fairly self-evident. And then in March of this year, we launched Bike Streets for Android, which is really exciting. And we had this fun launch party at River North Brewing. And thank you to everyone on this call who was able to make it, and everyone who's not on this call who was able to make it. It was a rip-roaring time with all sorts of really fun and interesting things going on. Not the least of which was a group of unicyclists who were riding on the handrails, but we'll save that for another time. We should have put that picture in here, though. Anyhow, there are two riding modes in the Bike Streets app. The first is what we call Wander. And Wander is for when you have your own route that you want to ride, but you want to participate in the community voice. This is like the epitome of a Wander ride here. This was an art tour that I did with some folks in the Santa Fe Arts District, clearly not adhering to the Bike Streets map, which are the darker lines that are superimposed on the grayscale map. But Wander mode is really for folks who are confident on the streets, know their routes, and want to ride their own favorite routes, but also want to contribute miles to the overall Bike Streets app total, which is to say, to participate in the community voice. The second riding mode is what we call a guided ride. That might be a little bit more self-evident. That is basically a turn-by-turn navigation experience where you might not know the route that you need to take to get between two places. And just to show off a fun example of this, this is basically John F. Kennedy High School in Southwest Denver up to Montbello. That would be a fun and delightful ride. If anyone's interested in taking this adventure with me, let's do it. This is a turn-by-turn route in the iPhone app. And the community voice component is manifested in terms of the aggregate statistics that we as a community, everyone riding on Denver streets, put together. And I took this screenshot earlier today. We're almost at 45,000 miles ridden with the Bike Streets app since we launched iPhone last summer. And that's over 12,000-ish rides. So we'll hit 12,000 rides quite soon, and 45K miles if we haven't already. I haven't checked in the last few hours. We are constantly improving the Low Stress Denver bike map. We are on version 9.2, and not that the numeral 9.2 would be significant to you, but I think that it illuminates the fact that we consider this a constant work in progress. We are working very closely with a lot of local businesses, and I think it's really important for us to change the narrative around how we think about bikes and how business owners think about bicycles. Most importantly, that when people can bike places, it's really good for businesses. So we created this thing that we call a project within Bike Streets that we call Destinations. And the idea is to connect people on bikes and local businesses. So any local business can be a destination for free. And what you get is a page like this with a bike map that shows all the awesome places, all the awesome ways, excuse me, that you can get, that people can get to your restaurant or coffee shop or library, as the case may be. So every destination page includes a bike rack picture, because everyone wants to know what the bike parking situation is like when they get there. It includes a reward in many cases for riding. For example, River North Brewery will give you a free beer after you ride there 3 times. We automatically stamp your Bike Streets passport. So when you ride to a show at Levitt Pavilion, you'll get a passport stamp kind of like this. And then I think this is really cool and very novel. For generations now, it seems, businesses have had driving maps, which is to say Google Maps, embedded in their websites. And we created a bike map that any local business can embed in their website to really advertise the fact that they want people riding bikes to their business, and this is how to do it. And then last but not least, when you ride to one of these destinations using your passport, it shows up in your, using your passport, a passport stamp shows up in your Bike Streets passport. As of the latest count, we have about 175 businesses, and I'm really proud of the fact that these businesses run the gamut of destinations. Again, I think it's really important for us to expand the definition of bike commuting, which is to say, it's not just about biking to work. Any bike trip that replaces a car trip is equally beneficial to yourself and to the community. We just added our first Friends feature, and the idea behind Friends on Bike Streets is to encourage folks to try to ride bikes once a week. It's a fairly low bar, but our goal is, again, all ages and all abilities. And if we can get people who are not traditional bicyclists to ride once a week, and we're talking about our closest friends and family, no doubt if you're a confident cyclist already, there are people in your life who are not particularly confident out there, but talk about riding and how much they'd like to ride. This is our hope, a good way to get them activated. We continue to invest heavily in this ourselves, both our time and resources. And what is really critical is that we build a sustainable business model around this so that we're able to continue the work. And we have looked into some grants. Unfortunately, a lot of grant priorities are shifting, and that happens has happened historically and continues to happen. If you're navigating the granting landscape, you probably have experienced this. And often a lot of the grants that you'll find out there are not well aligned with the mission. And so you can end up chasing a grant that doesn't really fit what you're doing, and it creates substantial mission creep. So for us, profitability, being able to actually fund this ourselves, means that we can keep doing it and invest more and more and make the tools better over time, reach new populations and new businesses all across town. So to just kind of break it down how things work, in the past, up until last year, so from 2018 to 2024, we led these group rides all over town, and we had the online map, and that was free. That remains free. All that stuff is free. We now have our 15-minute city map analysis, which is a pretty fun tool to see all of the places that you can go within 15 minutes of any single point on the map in Denver. The destination stuff we were just talking about, passport, wander mode, friends, and the aggregate community stats, that stuff is all free. And then we have a paid tier, which includes the guided rides where we give you turn-by-turn routing. We have this cool thing in there called the Explorer's Map. It's kind of Denver as a giant board game. Surprise Adventure is a fun little tool like spinning the wheel in Wheel of Fortune to find a cool destination to go to. And then Flyby is another nifty tool to let you kind of see what a route looks like before you ride. And then last but not least, we have some statistics for you as an individual. So that's kind of how we think about it. We're trying to make this thing self-sustaining. And so we're continuing to offer a lot of this stuff for free forever. Our hope is that people will see value in the work that we're doing and decide to become members. Why $50? $50 is more or less one tank of gas. So I like to think about it that way, that if over the course of the year we're able to save you 1 tank of gas, you've basically broken even on your investment in our work. So looking forward, we're going to continue our group rides all over town. This is the Jewish Deli Bike Tour, an awesome event all over town, which we do with the Jewish Community Center. Vamos, interestingly, is back on the table with the bond. So we're having a number of interesting conversations about this as it relates to the bond. We're hoping to get some demonstration projects like this in Denver itself. And we're working closely with some city council folks, with DOTI, with the mayor's office as well, to try to build momentum, both for the idea of a reinvigorated shared streets and potentially more broadly, a connected network of shared streets across the city. We're working hard with a group of folks in Lakewood to add Lakewood onto the map, which is really exciting. If you're interested in scouting some routes with us in Lakewood, please just email me after this call. And then we're also connecting with advocacy groups in other cities to start talking and open conversations about how we can make this platform available for them. A couple weeks ago, unfortunately, I had to miss the Denver Bike Fest. I had some personal business back east, and I also had the opportunity to ride with some folks who lead advocacy efforts in Boston. It's a rainy day out there, and then New York City as well. This is under a giant highway, just for the record. And the idea is that these folks would create their own maps with their local knowledge, much in the way that we have with the contributions of many of you over the course of the years, people telling us what routes they like to take their families on when they're out riding. And ultimately, my dream for this is that this can become an evergreen source of funding for advocacy work across the country. So folks in Boston or other cities would deploy Bike Streets style maps and apps in their communities, and the revenue that we generate, we can share with them to help fund their work on an ongoing basis. I would say that my 5-year goals at the moment are to get tens of thousands of folks riding bikes in Denver every day, for Denver to have a complete high comfort bike network that all people can use, to launch Bike Streets in other Colorado communities and across the country, and to get this thing profitable so that we can continue to invest in what we consider to be meaningful and important work. So last but not least, if you're interested in getting involved, ride with us. First off, our next surprise adventure group ride is on June 1st. That's at bikestreets.com/events. Use the apps when you ride. Use either wander mode or guided ride so we can continue to raise the community voice and strengthen our case with the city to do some of these demonstration projects, at first on a small scale and then go bigger. That's at bikestreets.com/join. And then if you don't get our newsletter, that's a good way to keep up with the work, bikestreets.com/newsletter. And last but not least, I should also just mention this. If you do know advocacy folks in other cities, and would be up for making an intro, we'd really appreciate that. That's it. Drop me a line if you'd like. as@bikestreets.com.
Thank you. Questions for Avi? I think people have been mesmerized by your fast presentation style and have not been pulling their eyes away to type questions in, but quite an evolution. I saw you presenting on the Active Towns YouTube channel the other day with their folks. A really great update. So getting some more exposure outside of Colorado. Questions for Avi? You can find this in the usual app store, whether it's iOS or Android. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. Or you can just go to bikestreets.com and sign up there.
Follow the link. Okay. Great. The question I have for you is how can INC, we're a network of neighborhood groups fundamentally. Our committees are open to everybody, but the formal membership of INC are collections of neighborhood groups. How can we get the word to neighborhood groups about Bike Streets that they might pass on in their local newsletters or local Facebook pages, etc.? Is that something you would like? Is that something we can help
Yeah,
with?
certainly. I can send you some information if you have the distribution mechanism to reach them. Let's maybe take that one offline a little bit, but that would be great. We'd love to reach them. It would also be great to reach them in the context of some of the Vamos work. And the other day, the West Wash Park Neighborhood Association approved a motion to write a letter in support of doing a very limited demonstration project designed to be very small, what I think of as the atomic unit of Vamos. So one 12 cone intersection for one day, doing a traffic diverter study. So insofar as other RNOs are interested in participating in these types of demonstrations, we'd love to get them involved.
Great. I'll work with you on a message to get out. And then there's definitely some love in the chat here. People who've used bike streets. Matt Frommer said he loves bike streets. Brian says he recently used it to go all the way up to Northfield to the Home Depot there and worked great for
Nice.
safe rides. You said that you're on the 9 point something edition of the map. I'm assuming there's like two forces involved in the updates to the maps. One is just someone has a better idea about maybe a complicated area where there's not a comfortable thing to do. So what's the best thing to do crossing a busy intersection? And the other is, as the city makes new infrastructure, saying, is that truly a high comfort thing we want to recommend now and add it to your essentially map of recommendations? Are those the two forces?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The one addition to that is because we have designed this routing algorithm now, it's really interesting in how it reveals stuff that we didn't know before. So that is also one mechanism that is now in our toolkit. Routes that we were not aware of before being elevated that we can then go inspect.
So you're getting like a heat map of where people go, and you can look into,
this is actually more just when we run searches for certain routes. Sometimes it will reveal, you'll inspect the route and you'll say, wow, okay, I've never actually ridden that. Like, let me go check, let me go check that out. That might be one of those first and last mile type connections. So those sorts of things. And there are moments where the algorithm will prefer something off network, despite what I said before. And so we take a look at those pretty closely. And sometimes those have the potential to actually be real substantive upgrades. And as we make this available in other communities, we think that this is going to be a really meaningful tool for those folks to start to identify new opportunities. With a very simple example being, you use the algorithm, you run a gazillion simulated routes, and you create a heat map from that set of simulations, and you start to inspect, okay, what does the algorithm tell us are the routes that have potential in places where maybe we don't know the terrain as well.
Interesting. Okay, maybe I'll ask you more about that because I'm when I have heat map in my mind, I'm thinking you're learning from where people prefer to ride.
Oh,
based
yeah,
on
this
their
is what I'm
demonstration.
describing is an
Yeah.
algorithmically generated heat map through a lot of simulated routes.
Interesting. And somehow it has input in it about what's comfortable and not to go
It
on.
gives ideas, right? Like it creates candidates that need to be inspected closely.
Fascinating. There was a question here in the chat, but I think you covered it in your presentation. Why aren't Google's bike directions better? I think you covered it. It's so much more complex to have to know when it's a good idea to go into a park, when it's a good idea to get on the sidewalk for a little bit, because there's just no comfortable place to be on the street. Is there anything more you want to say about that?
I think that that's right. The local knowledge is one thing, and also the economic reality of it is not compelling to a company at Google scale.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, and happy
Cool.
spring. Hopefully we can get more people out on bikes.
Yeah, let's
and with
all
your
ride.
help,
Surprise Adventure 9 on June 1st.
June 1st. And the interested and concerned can get the message that actually there are reasonable places to ride right now, and we can keep pushing the city to make the network stronger. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
We've reached the end of our meeting. Thank you so much for joining. This will be posted on YouTube in the next couple days. We meet every other month. So let's see, it's May now. We'll be meeting in July, second Thursday of the month, and hope to see you there.